Hey y'all, and welcome back to a new video. Today we're going to be looking at a chess game that I played recently where I was in a position where I had to play pieces versus queen. Now the queen is obviously the strongest piece in chess. It's a very difficult piece to fight against when you just have a couple of pieces, but I'm going to be showing you some very simple ways to go about it and how you can yourself beat a queen with nothing but pieces. Alright, let's get into the game. D4, E6, bishop F4, D5, E3, and pawn to C5. This is a very classic position. Me trying to play London, as I always do, because I literally have no other openings, and my opponent going after it immediately with pawn to C5 while keeping the light sword bishop locked away temporarily, as they're going to try and play for E5 in the future, maybe, or maybe put the bishop on this long diagonal. In any way, knight F3, knight to C6. I play c3, my opponent goes bishop to d6, going after my dark sword bishop. Of course, this is also a very classic thing to do, and I simply slide my bishop back to g3, because if my opponent were to take my bishop on g3, I would be opening up my h file, and white would be considerably better. My opponent instead plays knight to f6, knight b to d2, of course, kind of trying to finish the classic London pyramid. The bishop is going to d3 as well. Short castles. And before I put my bishop on d3, I decide that it's a very simple and common idea to put the knight on the e5 square in the center here. And if my opponent were to take, of course, this would be a fork of the knight and the bishop, and white would simply be winning. If my opponent were to take like this, which is an idea, I still take back with the pawn here, and I can play a move like f4, and my opponent's knights are pretty restricted here in the center without that many good squares, without the f6 square, with my pawn on e5 actually doing a good job. But my opponent doesn't play that. After knight e5, my opponent goes with an idea that's very logical. He plays c takes d4, which by itself makes sense. I can take either way, e pawn or c pawn. For some reason this game I took with the c pawn. I decided that opening up the c file was reasonable. I did this because, of course, I thought that taking the e pawn was also reasonable. I can put my bishop here. I get the open e file. This is actually common for what white wants to do. But I decided that c-pawn was actually okay, because my opponent doesn't really have any access on this side of the board. If my opponent plays bishop to b5, I can always just play the move pawn to a3, queen to a5, pawn to a3, of course. I can get the rook on the c-file first, so I was like, okay, based on calculation, this is okay. And then my opponent shocks me with one of the worst moves that I've ever seen a 2100 rated player play. He loses a piece in one move with the move knight to d7. And you might say, well, why does it lose a piece? Because after, this is a very common tactic, by the way. Many people blunder this in the London. Normally the tactic is knight takes f7. I attack the queen and the bishop. Takes, I take here. But here it's even worse, because I take on c6. I'm attacking the queen, attacking the bishop, and now black is just going to be down a piece. But don't click away. The videos, I promise you, the idea of the video is interesting. There's still ideas here that you can like work with. But it's still a good video. Trust me. Anyway, yeah. And so the next phase of the game comes, and I have to convert the position. So okay, what's the best way to do that? How do we convert this position? We're up a piece. We have to trade pieces, right? Common idea, bishop takes d6. I thought about it, but I was like, okay, this doesn't trade as many pieces as I like, because my opponent can just take my knight, and my bishop has to go back, and I'm not too sure that I want to get into a position like that. So what I do instead is I get a little bit fancy, and I'm like, okay, how do I trade the most pieces in the least amount of time? We play knight to e7 check. My opponent cannot take on e7 because I take his queen. After the move king to h8, I simply take on c8, bishop takes g3, h takes g3, and rook a to c8. And now we've traded an extra piece, and I'm still up a full piece. Okay, pretty reasonable stuff. Trading pieces when you're up material. I mean, we're not reinventing the wheel here, are we? Bishop to d3, very classic. Opening, getting my bishop onto a better diagonal, attacking this pawn. Pawn to h6, short castles, pawn to e5, and my opponent starts trying to give me problems. This is a little bit annoying, I have to admit, this whole idea of pawn to e5, because if I take this pawn, my opponent comes in with the knight. I have to go bishop back to e2. My opponent has the c2 square under wraps. And slowly but surely, I'm going to get in a bit of a pickle. For example, queen c2, rook c2. My opponent has this skewer. This is a bit annoying, and I have to find like actually pretty reasonable moves, like knight to f3 to get a decent position here. But still, it's a bit of a problem. So I'm like, okay, I don't want to be involved with any of that. I don't want any of this like garbage with my opponent's knight getting in the center. What are we gonna do? We're going to make sure that my opponent, first of all, can't play this move, because this is another good move. I'm going to play the move bishop to f5. I'm going to trade more pieces. I'm going to trade off my light scored bishop for his knight. His knight can't move as it is pinned to his rook. And after my opponent takes on this square, first of all, I'm thinking about not taking right away. I'm thinking about just taking here. But for example, I can just take, and play e takes d4, knight to f3, or knight to b3, and I'm completely okay. Anyways, after bishop to f5, my opponent played pawn to g6, making sure my bishop has to move, takes, and taking on e5, and now I'm up 4 points of material, a full piece, and an extra pawn. Pawn to h5. Again, my opponent's getting desperate. He's trying to go after my king, because what else is he going to do? And I make a little bit of an inaccuracy. I should have played this move knight to f3 in like 0 time. But the reason why I didn't is because I thought that my opponent like could get in with the queen now that my queen isn't guarding the square, and then he's gonna play h5, he's gonna play king g7. I'm like giving him counterplay or something. I don't want to do that. I don't want to give him any counterplay. So I'm like, okay, I need to move my knight somewhere. I need to get involved in the game. I want to get to this d4 square at some point. I'm gonna play knight to b3 instead. Now my queen still guards this area. I'm gonna go here. This pawn is weak, rook c1 ideas, and life is good. Pawn to h4. Okay, I don't ever say no to a free pawn. I will take the pawn on h4. Even though it technically opens up the h file, I thought I'd be okay with a simple move like pawn to g3. King to g7, queen to f3. Going after this pawn by going for this. Rook c4, I play rook ad1. If you take this pawn, I take here. He has a little trick here with a rook here. If we just look at this line, here, rook here. But then I'm thinking about just playing queen here, takes, and takes. And I can win this position pretty easily. So I was like, okay, that's pretty reasonable. By the way, after this, I cannot take this because of checkmate on the board. So we're not going to do that. Anyway, after rook d1, opponent goes rook to h8. I should probably have taken on d5, realizing that there's no real problems in the position, or I should have played this move queen to f6 check first. Instead, I simply play the most logical move in my head, which is just g3, defending the pawn, but I actually miss my opponent's idea. And this is why we have a video at all. My opponent goes rook h takes h4, which I had calculated, and I didn't think it worked, because after gh4, rook h4, queen f6 is a fork. And I was looking at this and I was like, okay, I'm just going to be completely winning here. There's nothing to be done. My opponent can already resign. So I just took the rook, but my opponent has this move rook to g4, which is I just completely missed. Rook g4, he's attacking my king, and if I go king h2, my opponent goes rook h4. And if I go king g3, I get mated. So I have to sack my queen, or I have to agree to a draw. And this is why we have the video that we have. I have to play this with queen g3. I think for a little bit, I play queen g3, takes, and now we have to take stock of the position. So, what are the imbalances? Well, obviously, black has a queen, white has 2 rooks, and white has an extra knight. White has 5 extra points of material, but white's pawns are a little bit weak. White's only up 1 pawn in this position. White has 6, black has 5. This pawn is a little bit awkward. My pawn's over here, a little bit awkward. My king doesn't have the most safety in the world, but we can factor this out because my opponent has some weaknesses here. I can go after his king with moves like this, and go after him like this, and there could be issues. Like I could probably be able to get this position into a good game. My opponent goes queen to g4. Okay, queen to g4, logical. Hitting the rook. I can't play this because of this move, and I would lose all my pawns. So what am I going to do? I'm simply going to play this move king to g2, and say that, okay, after this move, I'm going to play king to h3. There's no more checks. My opponent has weaknesses here, weaknesses here. If we go in this line here, 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 I take this pawn, I think. And I'm going here next, so my opponent has to play a different move. And here I can really play whatever. I just can't hang my rook because my opponent's still not threatening checks. I'm playing a move like rook f4, and I'm doing well. I'm doing well because this is my next move. Okay, so my opponent's not going to do that. My opponent plays queen to e4, and this is where the technique comes into play, because now White's only way of getting this into a win is involved with a couple of very, very interesting steps. First of all, the first thing that White has to do, White has to make sure that the queen has no checks on the king. A little easier said than done because queens are very, very tricky. There are many, many ways for my opponent to give me some checks, and it's a little bit annoying. And then after I get into a position where there's no checks, then I have to do something with my pieces, get into another position with no checks, and the cycle repeats itself. So we're going to see how I do this game. First of all, I play the move rook to f3. Very, very simple. I'm defending this pawn. I think this pawn is very valuable because it stops this pawn from moving forward, and if this pawn can't move forward, then it is a permanent weakness. My opponent takes on e5, and I simply play the move rook to d2, defending the pawn on b2. Obviously, this is probably the best move, and White is only up 4 points of material now. Of course, rooks are 10, and the knight is 3, while the queen is 9, so pretty much equal. Now I have to make some progress. My opponent plays a little bit of an interesting move. He should be a little bit more aggressive towards my king if he wants to survive. He should play a move like queen to e4. F5 was a move that I was considering, but I was thinking about even playing a move like g4 at some point, getting rid of this pawn chain. My opponent instead plays an interesting move. He plays pawn to b6, which technically makes sense. He's stopping my knight from going forward on these two squares, but it feels very, very slow. And the pawn on a7 is still a weakness. He hasn't done anything about this pawn. He hasn't done anything about this pawn. Okay, now I have to understand which pawn am I going to go for. I decide that what I'm going to do is I'm going to go for the pawn on f7, because this pawn seems like the most difficult pawn to work with here. My opponent can't play f6 because I just take it, and trading the queen for 2 rooks here is simply winning because White is up a knight. So is it really that much of an issue? Not really. Because my opponent can sometimes play the move pawn to f5, and this g4 idea sometimes doesn't work because my opponent can just take. A lot of the time he can just take. So I decide, okay, I don't want him to play pawn to f5. I'm going to play pawn to g4 myself first, stopping this, and we're going to start making progress in the position. Queen to e4, very logical, and I have to get my king back into a position where it's safe. King to g3, queen to e5, and king to h3 does just that. And my next move is going to make progress in the position. Queen e4, rook df2, I'm attacking the pawn on f7. My opponent has to be very, very careful. Pawn to f5 played, g takes f5, g takes f5, and White is very, very close to just be completely winning here, where my opponent has no play left. But it's not that simple, because if I just willy-nilly take this pawn, now there's problems. Like rook h1 I have to calculate now. Like taking this pawn I have to calculate now. There's queen h1, sorry. There's many ideas. There's many ideas for my opponent to give me checks here, and I don't want to do that. So what I do first, and it's very, very instructive, I'm just, okay, I don't really know what to do. I can't take the pawn immediately. I'm just going to improve my worst placed piece. That is the knight on b3. I play knight to d4. This is the best move in the position. Target the pawn. If the pawn moves forward, this is not a problem, because in this position, if for example f4, I can play rook to g2. If my opponent's king goes out here, I can play really whatever. But I mean, I don't see what's so wrong with rook f4, queen e3, and like king g4 here. My opponent has no checks. Life is good. Yeah. So okay. It's pretty easy. So my opponent can't play that. My opponent instead goes with the line queen to g4, which I had calculated. I played king h2, queen h4, and king to g1. My opponent cannot give me another check because of rook to g2, which would skewer the queen to the king. And now he has to run. King to f8. I think for a while I play knight takes f5. For some reason I thought I played rook takes. And point is, I'm simply going to attack the queen first. I'm going to go for some like discovered checks, and I'm going to go for the win. I probably should have played this move rook f5 first. After king e7, I don't think I can take this pawn. I feel like there's some trick. I don't think I can take this pawn. It's actually okay. But I was just thinking about rook f7, and after king here, like I can, well, king can't go there because of knight there. But like king d8, oh my god, it's very, very complicated here. Sorry. Maybe king e8 is okay. But even so, like check here, I'm able to win the queen in this line. No, I guess I just probably just win the queen in every line here, and black would be lost. But for some reason I didn't go for that. I don't know. Maybe I'm stupid. Doesn't matter. Knight takes f5, queen to g4, check. And I play the move rook to g3, which is my idea. The knight defends the rook. The knight's going to move. The queen is hit, and my opponent's king is in dire straits. Queen d1, king g2. Probably should have played rook f1 here. I don't know why I didn't. Again, low time, playing too fast. I'm not too sure. Rook, king g2, king e8, and knight back to d4. And I'm arguing in this position that my opponent still has weaknesses. His king is very, very exposed. And I'm going to start the process all over again of avoiding checks with my king. Queen to d3. I play rook to g8, king here, rook g7. And I decide after a little while here that, okay, I'm trying to hunt the king. If I went with rook f6, I thought that my opponent's king could run away to c5. Apparently not. Apparently I just win here. I just saw this line. I didn't see any more ways to win. Like a3, I didn't think this was okay for me. Well, but I miscalculated. The knight defends this square. Yeah, from a distance I didn't see that. Anyway, I play rook g7, king at d6, and I decide here I'm going to play the move knight to f5, defend this pawn, and here I'm going to take on a7. And I'm arguing that I'm going to be up a pawn, my opponent has nothing, and I have to repeat the process one more time. Queen e4, king g3, queen e5, king h3, and I calculate this all, queen h8, and king to g4. My opponent has no more checks except for the one on g8, which would be simply met with the move rook to g7, and white would be easily winning. My opponent goes queen to h1. I play rook to g7 anyway. My opponent goes here. I'm going to play king to f3, and life is going to be good. There are still no more checks in the position because after queen h1, I'm going to be doing all right. This actually happens. My opponent goes queen d1. If queen h1, I was thinking about, yeah, king e2 was the line here, and king d2, and there's no more checks. And after king d1, I play king g2, and there's no more checks immediately. And I'm going to start putting progress, mainly against my opponent's king. I'm trying to checkmate him at this point, because I'm looking at this, my opponent, my knight is here, my rooks are able to come in, I'm able to like do some things with my pawns. There's like ways for me to make a mating net, so that's what I'm going to try to do. Queen to h5, rook to g3. I'm just simply holding the position. I don't need to do anything right away. I'm not allowing my opponent any counterplay. Rook c2 is a checkmate, which I calculated, but I didn't see it. Yeah, mate in 30. It's kind of hard. Like king b5. I just thought he runs away. I just didn't see this, but technically mate in 25 after rook g7. No idea. Anyway, rook g3, rook c2, king b4, and I play this move at knight to d6. My opponent has no checks here. I'm taking away squares from my opponent's king, and I'm going for the glory. Queen e5, rook to g4 check. I'm still trying to checkmate my opponent. King a5, b4 check, king a6, and here's something funny happens. I actually just do something really stupid. Like I spent like 2 seconds on this move. For some reason I had prepared knight b5, which just hangs knight in one move. Kind of funny, but luckily my opponent didn't see it. He spent 10 seconds on this move, which is kind of funny, and not taking a free knight. Maybe just believed me that I was fine. I don't know. I just hung a knight one move. Anyway, knight c7 check, king b7, and knight takes d5. There are still no checks on my king. I'm being very, very careful not to allow any checks, and my opponent's king is about to get checkmated here. Queen d3, rook g7. My opponent goes king to b8. If my opponent went king a6, it would be kind of interesting, but I was just thinking about going knight c7 here, and like, I don't know, moving my rook somewhere. Maybe I could even figure out a better line. Oh, knight, wait. What's the best line here? b5 check. He can't take with the queen. Sorry, I want to analyze this. Obviously, if here, this is bad. King a5, there's just a checkmate here. So my opponent has to take. And after this, rook b2, king c5, rook c7. He can't take the knight. My opponent goes king d4. This is like really interesting. King e7. Rook e7. Somehow I'm winning. Rook b6 here, and okay, whatever. It's an absurd line. We just chase the king around, ring around the rosy, and white is winning. Anyway, doesn't matter. I didn't see that at all. I just yeah, my opponent just hung mate here. I didn't see it with 45 seconds on the clock. King b8, check here, and check here. And actually here I miss a checkmate in 1. a4 is mate 1, but I see a checkmate in 2, which is knight to c3. My opponent can take with the queen, but I just thought, okay, if you do this, you're losing. King b4 and rook to a4, checkmate on the board. And that is how you play against the queen. You avoid checks with your king. You try to make sure your king is safe. You make a small bit of progress, and then you repeat the process over and over again until your opponent loses the game. This would have been a perfect game, really, if I didn't hang my knight in one move, but, you know, whatever, it happens. Anyway, that's all we got for you today. I hope you guys found this entertaining, instructive, all of the above. If you did, remember to like, subscribe, do all the normal things YouTubers tell you to, and yeah, that's it. Good evening and good night.